And you think wrong. So first, this guy is arguing that the minimum wage should be zero because it causes barriers to entry. That's not what barriers to entry means. Barriers to entry are the obstacles that a business must overcome to enter a certain industry. So for example, if you wanted to start a farming business, the barriers to entry would be you'd have to purchase land, which you have to find and it costs money. You have to buy equipment, which again is expensive, so that's a barrier to entry. Being able to produce enough product to get a contract with a market to sell your product can be a barrier to entry. Or simply a fixed cost any new tenant must incur to enter an industry. That's the definition. Has nothing to do with making people unemployable like you said it did. Now, labor costs are not a fixed entry cost, they're a fluctuating operational cost. Now, in some cases, you might be able to argue that labor is a barrier to entry if you need highly skilled, highly specialized, highly expensive labor, like, I don't know, an engineer maybe. But that obviously has nothing to do with minimum wage. Now let's get into why, if you think the only correct minimum wage is zero, you're wrong. And I know you thought that this was my opinion, but no, you're just objectively, factually wrong. Your whole misguided perception here is that higher wages kills jobs. From a localized standpoint, wages are a cost of doing business. Let's pretend you own a bakery and you can't afford flour and you can't figure out how to adjust your business practices to afford flour, then you don't have a viable business model. Same thing with labor. If you can't afford to pay the people working for you a living wage, it's the same as not being able to afford flour. And therefore, your business model sucks, and unless you can fix it, you don't deserve to be in business. Free market, baby. And I use that example because the government sets price controls on agricultural goods like flour, similar to the way they set price controls on labor with things like minimum wage. And yet the people bitching about raising the minimum wage never seem to bitch about farm subsidies or ag price controls, and they're basically the same fucking thing. Though now, thanks to Reagan, basically all farm subsidies and price controls are corporate welfare because like 3 companies control the entire agricultural industry, but that's a topic for another video. Now we can get into why you're wrong about how raising the minimum wage doesn't make people unemployable or kill jobs. See, despite what Jeff Bezos wants you to believe, he is not a job creator. I'm a job creator, you're a job creator, everybody watching this video is a job creator. We create jobs by spending money. It's called demand. They covered it in Econ 101 right before, barriers to entry. And if there's a demand for something, that creates jobs to meet that demand. Now, people can only make job-creating demand when they have 2 things: money to spend and time to spend it. So now follow along with me because I don't want to lose you. If you pay people more, they have more disposable income that they spend less time working for. And then they use that time that they're not working to spend that disposable income, which means that they are then creating more demand for goods and services that in turn require more jobs to fill. I know it's complicated. I mean, Henry Ford did figure it out like a fucking century ago. It's why he went to the 40-hour work week. But hey, not everybody can have the intellectual prowess of the dude who was substituting his diet with weeds from the ditch. Seriously, Henry Ford ate weeds out of the ditch. It's a thing. Go look it up. But anyway, up to this point, we've all been covering, economic theory. And I did say you were wrong, statistically, objectively, factually wrong. So let's get to why you're wrong. By the numbers. Minimum wage was instituted in the United States in 1938. Now, logically, we would think that if not having a minimum wage was doing such an awesome fucking job, we probably would have stuck with that, right? But I know I'm expecting a lot with logical interpretations here. Now, but as far back as I can find unemployment data is 1897. Between 1897 and 1938, the unemployment rate was consistently in the double digits, as high as 25%. Now, sure, there was a few years where it would dip down into single digits, but low unemployment back then would have been under 10%. Poverty rates are a little difficult to quantify for this time as well, but in the 19-teens, 20s, and 30s, it's estimated that poverty rates were 66 to 78%. And then after 1938, you know what happened? Unemployment tanked. It dropped below 10% in 1941 and has only been above double digits once, to 10.9% under Reagan in 1982. And you know what happened to poverty rates? They tanked as well. Who would have thunk? You pay people more, they're not as poor. And then the data gets really simple because you can compare the poverty and unemployment rates to minimum wage hikes throughout the rest of our history. Guess what? There is zero correlation between raising the minimum wage and unemployment strikes or raises in poverty. In fact, historically, the year following an increase in minimum wage, unemployment rates go down. And according to Pew, minimum wage peaked for adjusted buying power in 1968. You know what unemployment was in 1968? 3.4%. That's a record low. No, it was also at a near record low in 1968. Poverty rates at a little under 12.5%. Now, basically every developed country on the planet has a minimum wage. Even China and Mexico have minimum wages. But a lot of people who like to peddle propaganda to make people like you believe things that are wrong love to bring up the 5 developed nations that don't have a federally set minimum wage. Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Iceland, and Switzerland. The thing those people always leave out, though, is not that they don't have a minimum wage, it's that the federal government doesn't set the minimum wage. You know who does? Those pesky things that people who hate minimum wage are also always trying to get rid of. What are they called again? Lovejoys? No, that's not it. Couplers? No. Unions set the minimum wages in those countries. Sweden has 110 unions that nearly all of its citizens belong to. Employees in Iceland are automatically enrolled in unions. Oh, and Switzerland actually did adopt a federally mandated minimum wage in 2020. So hey, I can compromise on ideology. I am all for getting rid of a federally mandated minimum wage in favor of, unionizing basically all jobs and letting the unions negotiate the minimum wage for each industry. Either way, when it comes to you feeling that the only correct minimum wage is 0. It's not my opinion, as you said, that you are wrong, because I don't have an opinion on this. I just have facts. Facts that don't give a fuck about what you feel is correct.